Hello everyone, I'm Richard Collins. I'm the Interim Chief Executive here at RICS, and I just wanted to welcome all of you who are here in person to RICS and to thank all of you, whether in person or for the many people attending online, and thank you for attending today's event to celebrate International Women's Day. We've got a very full agenda focused on how we can all do more to advance inclusion. We'll do our best to stay on time throughout the event, but also to give plenty of time to ask questions, make comments, and take part in what I know will be a fantastic conversation. There will be a fully captioned recording of the event made available to all registered attendees, both in person and online, and we'll be circulating the full slide deck. There are no planned fire drills today, so hopefully will be unaffected, but should the fire alarm go, then it will be a real fire. And we will gather outside at St. George's statue, but there will be members of the RICS team to help direct you to get there. So, without further ado, I'd now like to welcome Tina Paye, RICS's Senior Vice President, to the stage to open the event. Thank you. Tina.
All right, can everyone hear me all right? It's wonderful to be here and to see all these faces and standing room only in the back. This is great. I'm glad we could do it in person. And I think last year it was a mainly online event. This year we have online as well as in person, so we're in a hybrid format. And thank you all for being here. I'd just like to say, this is a great event to kick off the marking of Women's History Month. And I have to say that I didn't even know there was a Women's History Month before I was given this task to introduce today. So I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm going to be here for all the sessions because I think I'm going to learn a lot from all of you. So I'm looking forward to that. We have a really exciting program today, mainly focused on allyship. And our speakers will, of course, talk about their experiences, their insights, their ambitions for advancing a more inclusive and diverse profession where everyone can thrive. As president-elect, I feel really passionate about this topic. It's one where I think RICS has a real opportunity to lead, and it's an issue that I think we all, matters to both our profession and the communities that we serve. So it's an issue that we need to be embracing. While we've made some undeniable progress from the 1980s, where RICS female membership was at 1%, it's not that long ago, the 1980s. Today we're at 18%. So while we've grown that diversity, women in the profession, it's still below the mark of where we should be, clearly below the mark when we look at other sort of benchmarks within the industry. So we have a ways to travel. There is also a very significant disparity in women's representation in the markets. There could be 30 percentage point changes between certain countries and regions and others. There's also differences in the composition of women in the different pathways, with real estate agency, rural, and land and resources showing around 1/3 of qualifying professionals as women, while geomatics, geospatial, building surveying, and minerals and waste only show somewhere between 6 and 10%. So these gaps and the nuances behind them are something that we're really interested to dive into in more detail in our research. And we hope to generate some specific insights covering the markets and the disciplines in order to drive effective action that makes a difference in these areas. I'm a great believer on data and measuring against a benchmark and growing our numbers based on a benchmark and a baseline that we know and understand. And I think data is going to be key driving this forward. Beyond the input level, there's also some glaring gaps that have become apparent by the time women lead leadership positions. Women make up just 4% of all FRICS designations, so only 4% of our fellows, which is the highest qualification within RICS. And this is where we need to see more women attaining that level. And the question is, why not? Well, we see that women's memberships lapse much sooner in their careers than their male counterparts that exit the profession, with a women's membership at the RICS lasting an average of 16 years versus 28 years for men. That's a full 12 years difference in membership length, which could explain some of that disparity at top level, but not only. So what can we do about it? RICS is already focusing on what surveyors do best when we're examining a problem, which is to create a consistent basis for measurement to drive relevant action. To that end, an annual report focused on data and insights on women in the profession is in development, complementing improvements to data collection and the institution's understanding of the wider membership's demographics beyond gender. As part of its ongoing transformation, RICS members and staff are also working in partnership to elevate and champion opportunities for women in the profession, ensuring the world sees it for the attractive, innovative, and exciting place to work that I know it can be. This is coming to life through RICS' continued sponsorship of Women of the Future program, and I hope you all are aware of that, and if not, I think we're going to be talking about it later on today, as well as through informal group networks and formal governance positions, as seen in the RICS committee recruitment and application window for governing council seats. Those are still open until, I believe it is next Monday, 9 a.m., so please step up and apply. You still have time. It's not too late. Where was I? Yes. We are also looking at intervention in education, an initiative which topped a recent poll of actions members would like to see RICS take to help increase women's representation in the profession at a very young age. Finally, RICS is working with members and firms. EDI leads to enhance Rule 4 of the Rules and Conduct around D&I and team working, with the aim of providing relevant practical guidance and case studies to support members and firms to create more inclusive cultures and practices. So for me, this is a really vital part of driving real change, as EDI cannot be seen as an optional extra, but it needs to be a core of what this profession is about and making it fit for the future. I like to see, as with all real change, this is the imperative and the opportunity to make the most of the talents we have wherever they reside. This can only be realized if we approach the task with open ears and a disposition to listen. And I think we need to see this as an opportunity for our profession. There's talents that just aren't being tapped into today and aren't reaching the levels of responsibility and seniority that they could be. And that is a goal that the entire profession can strive towards. I think attracting and retaining everyone who wants to make use of their skills, their unique skills in our profession, is a way also that we will reflect the public that we seek to serve and working to its advantage. And this starts with the sort of conversations that we're going to have today, the sort of discussions and lives on in the sort of commitments that we bring to the actions that we are agreeing. I know that Martin will be following me and sharing his thoughts from the perspective of the RICS board and giving further valuable context to our agenda, and I'm really looking forward to what we're going to be tackling together as a group today. Together, I know we can create the welcoming, successful profession that we want to see. So let's go into our conversations positive and take away from today the inspiration and clarity of direction to carry forward meaningful change in our work and in our profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tina, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here and to hear that we have so many people online joining us as well. As Tina has said, I'm the new RICS board chair. I took up that position on the 7th of December, and part of the responsibility that I have with that role is to help with the transformation and evolution of the RICS and implement many of the proposals that were put forward in Michael Bishard's report that many of you will have seen and read. One of the key planks of that was really to elevate DE&I, not only in the RICS, but also within the work that we do around the built environment and within our profession. And so that is a key plank of much of what we're going to be doing in the next 12 to 24 months. We have already embarked on interviews for the new chair of the DE&I panel, and I'm delighted to say that we've made an appointment there, and that person has accepted that role, and that person will continue then to appoint their panel to enable us to deliver on some of the work that clearly needs to be done that Tina has already identified. Clearly an awful lot for us to do, but an awful lot of good things that we can build on, I think. So really, I just wanted to endorse everything that Tina's said, to thank everyone that's helped put together the agenda for today. It's a packed agenda. I think we'll get an awful lot out of it. But we need to take this away from here and explain it to all our colleagues, and get their buy-in, get their endorsement, and get their support for all the things that we want to achieve over the coming weeks and months. So thanks again for everyone for attending. I'm going to pass over to Marion now, who's going to take the first panel. And hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Get the glasses on so we can see. Thank you. Thanks for that. So thanks for joining us today on this panel to talk about the importance of active and engaged allies. On paper, I'll be honest, it doesn't look that difficult, does it? We all just need to help each other, support each other. But there's clearly something that's not working, and it's not been working for some time. It's a message that's on repeat, and we need to think about why that's not translating into the actions and the deeds and the results that we want to see. We know why we should do it. We know we make better decisions when we have that cognitive diversity around the table. It's not just about colour and gender, it's about that cognitive diversity. And if you think about the kind of work that we do, that makes a huge difference to the important decisions that we're making within our businesses and within society going forward. And allyship enables that to happen. We know who should be doing it, and the answer is everybody. That's not up for debate, in my view. Where we get stuck is the what do we do and how do we do it? What do we do when we're being an ally? How do I know I'm doing the right thing? Do we need a big sign and balloons and a big arrow saying this is how we do it? At the moment, it feels like we do, because lots of people feel lost. I saw a post on LinkedIn just this morning from a man who was saying, yeah, it's great we have this, but what do I do? How can I play my part? And I think we need to help people to help us. At least that's where I think we are right now. But if we don't have a sense of what good looks like, how will we notice when things are different? And I think we need to tune in to noticing. Tina mentioned data, and absolutely that's important. But we all know data can be fraught with challenges as well, because it depends what you're actually measuring. So it's important that we tune in, start to understand and notice what is going well. We've got to stop doing diversity and being diverse, and that's where we'll start to see the big changes. So there's no right or wrong to get started. There isn't a blueprint. We just need to start doing something. And when we do, it's empowering for all of us. And that's what we're going to talk about on our panel today. I'd like to welcome them all up. They're a group of people who've actually recognised their own personal motivations and given themselves permission to act and to do things and to make a difference. And I hope that you'll learn from their experiences as we talk. So if you'd like to come up. This is always the awkward bit as to who sits where. Who's got the favourite seat? Great stuff. So let's get started. Can we just first of you start this end, Natalie, if that's all right, as you go to take a drink, and just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you currently do?
So my name is Natalie Carter. I'm a commercial real estate lawyer, senior associate at Greenberg Traurig. Anything to do with property, so working for developers, investment managers, retailers, anyone that needs to buy, own, occupy property. On the diversity side, I'm a committee member of Black Women in Real Estate, which is why I've been invited to sit here today. And I've also, I would say, spent the last 10 years of my career advocating for diversity in the legal industry as well. So I have lots of experiences of diversity programs, what works and what doesn't. So.
Great stuff.
My name's Sinead Clarkson. I work for a plastering subcontractor based near Leeds in West Yorkshire. I'm a committee member of the Yorkshire branch of the National Association of Women in Construction. We run events trying to get children onto site visits, introduce them to the construction industry. And I've also been involved in campaigning for better facilities for women on construction sites after experiencing myself a lack of welfare facilities when I was visiting sites.
Hi, I'm Pete Wilder. I'm the head of property at a company called Oxford Science Enterprises. We're a company builder working with or trying to build great ideas out of Oxford University. And I'm also the head of the Inclusion and Diversity team.
Hi, I'm Karen Ching. I am a regional director in the program advisory service with Faithful and Gold. I've been in the industry for the last 23 years. I worked on some of the most largest program, including, well, in 2012, I delivered London Olympic Games. I thought, wow, that was it. That was the biggest program. But then during the pandemic, I was involved in building NHS test and trace. So that was interesting.
Hi everyone, my name's Kevin. I worked in residential surveying for 8 years before taking a role as technical partner, focusing on the learning and development of our ASOCRICS and our APC programme. And for the last couple of years, I've chaired the LSL Inclusion and Diversity Forum, focusing on the D&I needs within our large business.
So we've got quite a range of people who work for corporates or small businesses, a range of different things that you've been involved in. I mentioned that there's no blueprint, which would be great if we had one. What advice would you give to others about being motivated and getting started to do something just like you have? Let's start with Natalie.
Well, I think my own personal motivation is based on my own lived experience. Being born in this country, going up through the education system, university, from 16, I've always been a minority. So I've understood how that felt. And growing up in a very strong Caribbean culture, we were always taught that, we are to make room for others who look like, think like, and speak like us. And it was also about trying to create an environment that I wanted to be in. And I didn't always want to, throughout my whole entire career, always be the only person in the room, because that in and of itself can be draining. because having to explain or justify your own existence and not really having what you think as the cultural norm be the cultural norm in the group that you occupy. So I think for me, my personal motivation, and I encourage other black women and other young black people coming into this industry to be proactive, is that you're trying to create an environment that is essentially safer for you and is fairer for you. And I think in terms of other people who form different parts of demographics who want to be motivated, I think, you know, we don't really have to do much to see the general inequality that we have in society and how we talk about people from underrepresented in different groups. And I think we should always be challenging ourselves to think what we are personally doing to make the environment we're in a better place. And so I think that should be the motivation that underpins everything that we do about making things fairer for everyone, regardless of whether the system works for you or not.
And, you know, we can go out there all gung-ho and let's change the world, or we can just create spaces that we feel welcome. I know that's where I started with everything that I've done. So for you, Sinead?
I think for me, it's about making small changes where you can. So everything that I've got involved with or that I've done, I've seen a problem in my working experience or my learning experience, and I've said, well, why can't I change that? Why can't I make a small step, start a petition, introduce more people to the industry just by going and attending a few school events myself? And it's incredible how much those small actions escalate, especially when a few people get involved. And you'll tend to find once you start something, people gather around you and start to help, and you find that lovely group of people. So yeah, I would say starting small, even if your small action feels like nothing, it could turn from a tiny little water droplet into a huge flowing river of activity, and that's what I found has happened.
So my experience in D&I came from my wife, who I met 20 years ago, and we got together, and at the point that we were starting to think about having children, my wife is a super talented, extremely bright, able, brilliant woman. We had a conversation about the fact that, you know, something that I hadn't considered for a second was that she wasn't going to give up her job just because we were planning to have kids together. And from that point on, we agreed that we would split our responsibilities with our kids 50-50, except for the first year, sort of 9 months and the following year. I didn't have much to do with that bit, but actually, so from that point on, I was always sort of working flexibly, and I had, but up until that point, I'd seen the impact that being a woman had on her career, separate to mine. And from that point on, when I started having conversations about working flexibly, I suddenly encountered a difference in my workplace, the way I was treated, questions about commitment and that sort of thing that sort of really felt quite alien to me. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'd recommend that if you are in the majority, if you're able to channel your thoughts into experience where you perhaps felt less than part of the majority, where you felt like another, like you weren't part of the group, then you can start to sense what it must be like for people that are coming from underrepresented groups. And for me, that sort of I felt some sort of righteous indignation about that from my own perspective, and then thought, well, crikey, if that's just me with my middle-class white male background, then what must it be like for others? So I think the critical bits for me were, number one, having a platform that I could work with, where I could basically, where I didn't have to hide the fact that I work with an element of flexibility. That was just seen as sort of part of my job. And then the second bit was having a leader in the team who was really prepared to sponsor the drive for inclusion and diversity, and having some peers that I could work with, so that I felt that I wasn't trying to work on my own, and therefore, and in doing so, was able to get some results.
Karen?
Hi. Yeah, so I think my own personal journey and experience have motivated me. I mean, I have been in the industry for 23 years and only became a director after 22 years. So I think every time I went on maternity leave, it set me back And then sometimes I never really understood why I didn't get my promotion despite the work that I've delivered. And I think in the end, it was my own. I went through a very significant, difficult crisis in my own life. I had a daughter with a severe disability. She was born in 2012, just after I've completed the Olympic Games. So I went from really high to really low. I was in hospital for a very, very long time because she was born with a rare genetic condition. And I became a carer. I was on 40 pounds a week on carer's allowance. I couldn't go to work. And then eventually when she got better, I applied for a new job and I got a job at Deloitte, one of the big four. So that was a really major milestone for me to overcome being away from work for many years and then coming back, getting into the rhythm of things. And then I realized that I had a lot to offer, and I have actually overcome a lot of obstacles to come back to work. So when my daughter passed away in 2017, I realized that I cannot waste any more time. I need to get on with what I need to do. And I think my motivation to support others is I want to see everyone having the opportunity to fulfill their full potential so that they feel that they're able to bring their true self to work. I mean, we have a life outside of work, and that could impact on what we do. When, you know, we need to be able to allow people to feel comfortable with themselves when they come to work so that they can thrive. That's my motivation.
Yeah, I think to echo Karen's comments about being yourself when you come to work, I think I first spoke to Marion 3-4 years ago about the importance of visibility and being visible in the industry and yourself. And I think when I was growing up, actually, I wanted to be an architect. Instead, I married one. His name's Daniel. So I think being an openly gay surveyor and understanding how it feels to be within a sort of smaller marginalised group within the industry. Most of my friends in the business and in surveying are female. Some of them are here today, and I always think it's so important to encourage people to do more, put yourself forward for something, be visible and try and take that opportunity. So I think for me it was about wanting to see myself out there and help other people to do the same, because everyone matters.
I wanted to be a planner. I married a planner instead. Just for you. We'll put that on a quiz question afterwards. And just to say, there are some questions online, I think, that'll pop up at some point if you're online and want to pop a question through, and we'll take some questions towards the end as well. And I'd also echo, say, actually, don't forget Lionheart. One thing that I know that I didn't know about when I've had tough times is Lionheart. I don't know if they're here today, but do check them out. They've got some amazing resources, and they are here for us as surveyors. But what you've heard actually is some really, some quite poignant personal stories. And so again, we come back to the data and what's happening, but these are personal stories and people who've been motivated to do different things. I'd like to ask you all about what you've learned about yourself and what you've learned about the profession as you've gone through these different journeys and different experiences that you've had. Who'd like to start? I'm going to go Kevin.
That was because I made eye contact. That's the first mistake, isn't it? I think being in the industry for 10 years, I think, like taking it back to personal, coming out to my parents was fine, but it actually took me 6 years to come out in the workplace, which was quite a long time. It took me until a colleague was taking our dog to the vet and was getting time off, and I actually had to take my husband to hospital because he was unwell. So I think I sort of learned to accept myself a lot more and sort of believe in myself. And I think that's what I try and encourage other people to do, is just, believe in yourself and try and take that next step. Absolutely.
Anyone else?
I think at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we have families, we have issues, we have our own identity and we have our own perspectives. I think from my perspective, in 2004, I had my first child and I had to get my contract amended so that I can leave the office at 4 o'clock to pick up my son from the nursery at 6 o'clock. I mean, those days are gone. I mean, completely gone. I mean, I think as an industry, as the real estate and infrastructure and the building industry have moved on significantly from what I can see. I think the last 3 to 4 years, there have been huge progress made. So I think we're heading the right way.
And you do wonder, you know, how much a global pandemic for a couple of years has made a difference in that we should be talking about parenting, you know, or, rather than just maternity, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say the pandemic played a really important role, because before the pandemic, certainly for what I do, it was very much expected that you would, you know, the day's work started at 8 o'clock at your desk and finished it after 6 at your desk. And therefore, as someone who was working flexibly, that sort of created quite a lot of sort of tension and led to sort of senses of not quite belonging as much as I wanted. And actually, now that I'm involved a bit in this area and trying to have an impact, trying to first and foremost get our company to a position where we feel like we've got a really nice and inclusive team. It certainly, at a very personal level, it helps me at work. I feel like I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just being myself, and generally I'm just much happier going about what I'm doing.
I think it's worth reminding ourselves that, yes, we've seen a lot of change at a larger scale, and the larger companies are a lot more flexible. There's still a lot of inflexibility at the bottom end of the industry, and the smaller businesses, depending on who you're working for, still might expect you to sit at a desk 9 till 5 Monday to Friday, and that's that. You can't go and pick up a child or arrange childcare out. It's very different experience. So it's always worth remembering that while we do have progress at some parts of the industry, other parts are still lagging behind. As for my personal development, I'm absolutely terrified of public speaking, so here I am. No, getting involved with all these initiatives and the NAWIC in Yorkshire has really just pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and it's amazing what you can actually get into when you push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit. So I think for me personally, I've just learned that I can do a lot more than I thought I could. Things that I do have a lot more impact than I thought they would, and that you shouldn't doubt yourself. If you think you can change something, you probably can.
And I'd recommend following Sinead on social media.
Also out of my comfort zone.
I think personally for me, what has been good being involved in diversity initiatives and programs is just the importance of sharing experiences. I feel like if you don't share your own experience with others, whether that is through talking about your day-to-day or doing something like this or writing an article on LinkedIn, however you do it, you don't realise that there's so many other people who are having similar experiences to you. And so participating in things like this, building things, making opportunities for others, obviously gives room for more human connection and just builds more of a case as to why it's so important for us all to take action to improve things, because 9 times out of 10, you may feel isolated, but the way that you feel is not it's not an isolated experience. There are other people who are having similar experiences to you. So not only can you be a support, but you can receive support as well from others around you, inside and outside of your organisations. So I would say, like, the importance of communication, sharing experiences, and human connection has been something that's been really important for me.
And it does take bravery sometimes to do that first post or that first reach out to somebody, but it's a habit, you know, and like any habit, once we do more of it, you know, we get to know what it feels like, and it's all part of that noticing what's the difference, how do we know this is working. I just want to pick up on something that Sinead said about the difference between corporates and small companies. And I know, Kevin, you work for a large corporate and you're involved in the DI in your business. From a outsider who's worked with both, I echo that. I see smaller companies really struggling with the resource, the connection, but actually making and doing amazing things in terms of impact. And I hear about great things that have been done in the corporates, but it feels very as though we're locked out because it's top secret and you've got the secret to success. What's your experience? I'm sure it's not like that, obviously, but what's your experience of it?
It's okay, because
Kevin?
I'm not good at keeping secrets anyway, so that wouldn't work. Just don't tell me. So, ESERV Chartered Surveyors is one division of 3 of Estate Agency Financial Services that creates LSL Group. So overall, there's actually 26 businesses. So it isn't quite as straightforward because there's a whole host of different businesses there that operate differently, communicate differently, and we're trying to make everybody within the group feel seen, heard, valued and celebrated regardless of their personal background or the job that they do. So whilst there is a lot going on, it is baby steps for us being, part of a larger PLC, and we have, I think sometimes I write sort of quarterly updates to our forum and sort of stakeholders, and sometimes it's really important to just sit and list what you've actually achieved in the last 3, 6, 9 months and what you hope to achieve and what you personally think looks good in that time. So for us, it's a lot of work, but I find it really encouraging that, I report directly into our group CEO and one of our chief execs and deal with the board and the HR director. So there is an appetite there. Absolutely. I find it encouraging.
And we've just had a question pop up actually from on the online, if I can direct it at you. What did the panel recommend for encouraging a reluctant company or boss to embrace EDI? Because if you're talking to lots of different people.
I think from experience, a lot of people in senior roles are scared of saying the wrong thing, so they say nothing, and that's often worse. So I think it's about trying to encourage those psychological safe places to have open and candid conversations. So I think the first step is always communication and speaking about things.
I think that's where allies come in as well. I think particularly from a construction perspective, there's often predominantly men in the room. If there are men there who are comfortable speaking about something with a woman or someone from a different ethnic minority or whatever it may be, other men will follow suit. I'm not saying just men, I'm saying, oftentimes I've been in a room full of senior women, and senior women can be some of the worst when it comes to supporting other women. Hope there's nobody like that in this room today, but they can. And there's just been one person who's made the effort to come and speak to me and make me feel like I'm involved in the conversation. And as soon as that happens, everyone else changes their attitude. So I think that's a really important point, that make them feel comfortable, but also if you're one of those people making other people feel comfortable, you're an ally and you're opening up the conversation.
Karen?
Yeah. So I've worked for large organizations, and I know they've got big budgets, they've got lots of infrastructure, they've got all the facilities you need to do all the events, associated with diversity and inclusion. But I personally think that everyone has a role to play, and individual can make a contribution and an impact. What I would say is, do not be a passenger. You need to drive the change that you want to see, and you need to drive the impact that you want to deliver. So get involved in the conversation and see what you could do and how you can be engaged at whatever level, even without the budget or the infrastructure. I think everyone can be part of that journey. And if you do that, you feel that you have contributed to that wider impact.
Absolutely. And I don't underestimate the power of even just knowing that there's an event here today for women who might not attend or engage, but they will know that there is something going on, which means that at point of need or when they're ready, they will engage with it. And that's that whole ripple effect, isn't it? And something I just wanted to pick up actually that on the point that Pete was talking about, not to get out the small violin and it being quite hard for men. Oh. But actually, I think there are some very toxic male work environments of you have to be in the office and you have to work long hours. And we've also got a generation of men coming through who need to break patterns. And that's what you're doing. You've been breaking a pattern of what the more mature surveyor or person might have. We're always breaking patterns, and that's okay. you know, every generation we're learning something new. As we're in the RICS here at the moment, and I've heard about all of your initiatives and different things that you've got involved with, what do you think RICS needs to be doing, or how can RICS help you?
I'll kick off if that's right. I'd say, so one of the things that we do as an organisation that invests in companies is that we have certain requirements of our companies that they hit certain levels, that they first of all, if we're going to approve a company, make sure we've got sort of full diversity data based on the company and the founding groups. We then monitor that data on a quarterly basis, and that forms part of the review process. And we recently ran a survey for the actually 50 out of 100 companies, the larger ones, to help them with their D&I processes. So we hired a company called Diversio, and who specialise in portfolio surveys, and we got them to send a survey to 50 companies, and most of them responded, and the feedback that we got was really, really positive, because it for a lot of companies, especially at the smaller end, who feel that they don't have the resources, the time, the understanding, the levels of comfort to go down this journey looking at inclusion and diversity, it really gave them a springboard and actually produced some really interesting data for them to analyse and then monitor going forward. So I wonder, I don't think there's something in the industry at the moment that looks at the top firms or industry-wide that's asking people to share their data, that just shines a bit of a spotlight on how individual companies are doing, or how the market as a whole or the industry as a whole is doing. But I think that would be really interesting. And then the other thing we found working with companies that are kind of at the beginning of their journey is that, sometimes companies don't know where to start. So actually having some recruitment policy templates, some HR sort of D&I friendly policies that were just available for people to mark up and alter as they needed to, a playbook that was just a starting point for companies to work with if they don't have the resources to create it themselves. That we found to be really, really valuable. So perhaps that's something that the RICS might consider.
Well, and even further from that, it's a great opportunity for regional boards, peer-to-peer, small business mentoring. We've got to view this as an opportunity. Anyone else?
I think it's important to lead by example. It's been quite encouraging to see, since I entered the building today, quite diverse staff, quite a lot of women working, and I'd be interested to know, what's the working policies like at the establishment? Is there flexible working? Is it an enhanced parental leave policy? So if we're trying to encourage the industry to change, what we're doing at a top level. I think communication is important. I know I personally speak to Sybil quite a lot, and I'd be interested to know if other firms are doing similar, because I've learned quite a lot through chatting and working with Sybil.
And they're a very small team. Mm-hmm. There's 2 people, 130,000 members. Is that enough resource? And what kind of resource does it look like? And it comes back to what Karen said about when we've got to start ourselves. If you think about the different boards, committees, working groups, we're all able to have a bit of an impact, aren't we?
I think that's something I would comment on, is to these lovely, everything that's been put in place that Tina was talking about. It sounds fantastic, but it needs to be properly resourced and it needs to be carried through, because I think the elephant in the room here is RICS has a pretty poor track record of the initiatives and things that have been in place previously sort of fizzling out, shall we say, if we're going to be honest about it. So fantastic, these new things are fantastic. Let's see it properly resourced, and let's see these things coming into place and really impacting workplaces, rather than just sort of paying lip service.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to...
Yeah.
So I just want to add to that. So I think I've been a member of RICS since 2012, and I think we have made good progress in the industry, and I think RICS has embraced that and made good progress in the last sort of 3 to 4 years, from what I can see. I think I would like to see RICS. I think RICS should should be the champion and the enabler, really, for people in the industry to sort of pursue greater progress. So that's what I like to see. I think RICS is already making good progress, but they need to be, enabling others to do that.
And there's a difference between handing here's a D&I policy on a plate. It's that whole education piece and back to being diverse rather than doing diversity. Anything for you, Natalie, before we...
I was just going to say, I think that the RICS can play a greater role in actually raising the profile of surveying as a career option. Because I feel like a lot of people outside of the industry don't know what the RICS is, what it does. And so where you have more people from different backgrounds going to university, they might not even understand that being a surveyor and the vast extent of that career is. Even having a career in the real estate industry, they don't understand what that actually means. And so I think a very good way where the RICS can take the lead is actually raising awareness of its existence, of surveying as an industry and how important it is to our economy. And I think that is probably one of the fastest ways that you will get more interest in it. But I would also say that the RICS also needs to think about what it does to support, outside of initiatives for businesses, what it actually does to support its members who are women. I know that we know the difference and the gap between the length of membership, but there are always things that RICS can do that are specifically targeted at supporting women, finding out what they need, because that changes over time. And also it changes by region. So what a woman surveyor in London might need will be very different from what someone in Yorkshire might need, depending on where they are in the system. So those are things that RICS can do and champion without necessarily involvement from organisations as well.
I think for me, it would be coming back to that cognitive diversity, so that there are not working groups, boards, committees that are heavily weighted one way rather than another. I think that has the potential to make a huge impact. Should we take a couple of questions? Has anybody got any questions from here? See, I've forgotten your name. I should know it.
Charlotte Neal, Director of Surveying Standards here at RICS and also a member. Peter, I found it really interesting hearing you talk about having similar issues to a lot of the females dealing with childcare, but just in general, in terms of any type of diversity, have the panel got any quick tips to help people approach those conversations with senior members of their organisations to help get the support that they want and need?
I think the pandemic has changed the way we work, which has helped a lot of working women and men. I used to need help with my childcare, but now I don't. We just juggle it between my husband and I. Yeah. So I think in terms of conversations with like team leaders, well, I think we need to be open and honest about how things could work for ourselves and then how it will work for the team or the company that you're working for, and have that conversation and come up with a solution.
And that's the thing, sometimes we don't know what the solution is. I would say get on Google. You have rights, there are legal rights as an employee, and there should be a HR handbook on all of those things, and a lot of businesses don't have that. So the first thing I would say is to understand what you need legally. Secondly, contact Lionheart, who can also help you, signpost you to different resources. And then really it's about finding a network of, if I think about I set up a network of 3 of us who were pregnant at the time, and it was a working mum's lunch, and I think we met twice. But just knowing that there was something there was really helpful. So it's going out, reaching out, asking for help. Often there is help available. We don't ask for it because we feel like we need to do it the hard way, or it all becomes very difficult and emotional. So there is a resource and there is help out there. That would be the first thing I would say. Anyone else? Yeah, down here. Just bring a mic over.
Hello, I'm Jane Ballantyne. I'm a building surveyor, and I've moved into the academic world, and I'm now a principal lecturer at London Metropolitan University, where we have a very diverse cohort of students. But what I wanted to say is everybody here has been saying things have got better, or you've got to. It's almost as if it's us who have got to do things to make things better. And maybe, as you've said, the corporates are getting better, but some of that is just on paper and on their websites. And I don't think it is up to us 100% to do things. I think we need to start having, things like, look at the gender pay gap for property and construction. It's absolutely dreadful. There's very, very few senior women or women in senior positions within surveying, property, real estate, construction companies. And it's not just about giving us, although it's very important, but childcare and flexible working and stuff like that. It's about a change in culture, and I think some of that culture has to be driven from the top. And I think, firstly, the RICS and the reporting, maybe like the Law Society do, that it's mandatory to report all your statistics.
And if I can just come in there, because I agree. I don't think we're anywhere near done. And you'll go on social media today and everyone's pat on the back. And I remember being at a conference once and it was, hey, everything's great, and I was sat there nearly in tears thinking my career is over because I don't know how to get back to pick up my kids. And this is the different, we've got to look at the data and what's available and get better data, but then we've got to start listening to people and creating forums where they can. I think it's quite disappointing that we still don't have a DEI board in place for this Royal Institution. It's been going on for ages. And I think so whilst the RICS can do an awful lot, it can't be a regulator and a membership
No.
friend at the same time.
I'm not suggesting that at all. I think it's some of the larger member organisations that need to come to the forefront and try and address. But you need data to understand, to appreciate what is happening, and things like Louise Ellison did a report in 2008 or something like that, where I think the title was "Where are all the women in senior leadership in surveying?" And because people leave, and it's not just due to babies; it's because we've had enough. I did it. I've had enough of the very male atmosphere. In terms of career progression, you're just not part of the club, and you'll find that many women in senior leadership in bigger firms are to do with sustainability and the softer stuff.
And actually, they're probably making quite smart decisions for themselves and for
and
their
they
lives.
set up on their own and do their own thing.
Absolutely, and there's an element of competitiveness there, for these corporates. But equally, there are a lot of people who are not doing anything, who aren't even tuned in to listening to this, turning up here today. And even the small things that we can do make a difference. But we can also talk to RICS, we can also talk to our regional groups, and who are they?
But maybe things like, sorry, this is my last point, otherwise I'll go on forever. Things like, Property Week, Estates Gazette, stop giving awards to companies that have, 7% of their workforce in a female at senior leadership. That's not right. Let's have some things put down, tender lists, there's got to be certain criteria for that, get a bit more public sector.
And don't enter those awards. Don't accept those awards. And the final thing I would say on that, sorry, it's me and you show, is to turn it around, building surveying is 8% of women. Let's turn it around and say 92% men.
I was looking through a firm of building surveyors, well known, I will not say their name, and I was flicking through to find the details of somebody on their staff website, and one of my colleagues thought I was on a dating site because there were no females in it.
What you get up to in your own time, Jane. All right then, was there one quick question here in the front?
Sorry, hi. It wasn't actually a question. I just wanted to add on to what you were saying earlier, and it's to also add on to the point that Pete made. I got your name right? Yeah. When you said earlier about when you spoke to your wife, that's when you realized there are certain things that you never thought of. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to the industry, when it comes to getting people to understand the the difference between male and female, the difference in the different ethnic groups, the ethnic minorities. And it's putting people in a situation where they can actually get to understand what your position is in that company, in that social group, and whatever it is that we're talking about. And I think for us to be able to make that change, we actually need to provide that education. Because I don't think you walk into a room where there's a group of men sitting down will understand what it's like for a woman to go through the whole pregnancy and maternity leave and having to think about their career in the future. And the same thing if you're from a ethnic minority, when you walk into a room where someone doesn't understand what it is that you have to deal with, they'll never be able to make that change to fit you. And I think it's really important, as you said earlier.
And sometimes the gap is really big.
Yes.
It's a big ask to imagine yourself pregnant or whatever. But I suppose, you know, most of us, it's our lived experience has given us that fire in our belly to go and do what we need to do, however clumsily we've gone about it. What we maybe need to do is education is one part, but we've all been to school. We don't want to be preached to.
Yeah,
I think the other part of it is we should all get naturally curious.
That's what I mean.
Curiosity. What is that like?
Yeah.
How could it be? And start from there.
Sorry, just wanted to add on to that.
No, thank you. Really, really
I
good
just
point.
want to make a final point. So I agree with, sorry, I didn't get your name. Jane, yeah. So I agree with Jane that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of events, there's a lot of networks, there's lots of tagline, you know. Ultimately, we need to see some tangible results. We need to see some hard data that prove that we are making progress, yeah. So gender pay gap, publishing that, you know, or the other forms of data that can show progress. Yeah, we do need the data to enable us to demonstrate progress. Otherwise, it's all just talk.
I would say one thing as well, separately, is that I do think data is very important, but coming from working primarily in the legal industry, which I would say is probably about 5 to 10 years ahead in the diversity conversation, is that sometimes publishing poor figures doesn't always shame people the way that we think it is going to do, and it doesn't actually force action the way that we think it's going to force change. And so I just want to bear that in mind, because I think if we're putting things on park because we're like, well, when we have the data is going to show X, Y, and Z. Like, so many companies know their ethnicity pay gap, their gender pay gap, and still they are not taking any real tangible steps or actually holding anyone specifically accountable to actually change that. All of our participation in diversity and inclusion is based on our own lived experience. It's nothing that someone came up to us and said, oh, well, I think, you know, from the board, I think we need to really think about diversity, equity, inclusion. Can you please do something? It's always been from our personal lived experience, us, like Jane says, having to do the work based on making our lives easier and easier for people, the lives of people like us easier. And so I think the real focus in my mind should be not necessarily talking about diversity, equity, inclusion from a moral perspective, but actually looking into the data that shows that businesses that are diverse are actually more profitable, they're more agile, they're more innovative, and there is actually a strong business case for all businesses across all industries to become diverse and to sustain that diversity. And I think when we focus purely just on lived experience, we actually miss out a big, part of the attraction of diversity is the fact that diverse businesses make better decisions, they're more sustainable, and they make more money. And I would also say one of the biggest reasons we are having a push for diversity in the legal industry is because we have a lot of US clients who are doing business in this country, and one of their biggest requirements for their businesses is that they have a diverse staff and they have diversity at all levels. And so that is what is leading the change. So I don't know what the equivalent will be here in terms of possibly private equity investors, people, the kind of bigger developers, making sure that when they use contractors that they are also diverse. But it really is being not only financially driven, but also client driven as well. So it's not just about making sure it's fair for everyone. It actually makes better business sense to not be discriminatory in your hiring process.
And that's the message rather than the shameful numbers, which are quite embarrassing.
Yeah.
I would just add that, I think for us it's about attracting the best talent and retaining the best talent. And you need to have the net as wide as possible in order to do that. And from a client's perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done within the industry, but there's a lot that will be done, I think, from the perspective of clients, who we've got some really sort of hard ESG reporting standards. And we're now asking, when we're doing tenders, that we have diverse teams on the client account that are servicing our business. And so I think and that is only going to get more as time goes by. So I think there are a number of different areas that I hope will combine to make the situation better.
Great. Thank you ever so much for your time, panel. Thank you for your questions too. They're all off. They've gone.
I can do it from there, I think.
Okay.
So I'll do it from there, if you like.
Okay, you have it.
Yeah, I'm fine, yeah.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Shall we start? Hello? Hello, sorry. Martin's just walked out, so that's a bit worrying. So in the minute I get on the platform, he walks out. I've known Martin for a long time. Oh, good, Martin. Otherwise, I wasn't picking on you. I just thought I'd done something. I'm Sue Brown. I'm the Managing Director of something called Real Estate Balance. I would hope that a lot of you have heard about Real Estate Balance and what we do, but if you haven't, I'm about to tell you. And more importantly, I think, actually present the results of our survey, which we did in September and October last year, which has both good and bad news. And I'm working on the basis that I was told I had 15 minutes to do this, so I'm going to speak very quickly and try and I will get through it in 15 minutes, and what I'm not through in 15 minutes, we just have to leave. But could I have the next slide, please? Right, so you know, we did the survey from the 1st of September until the 7th of October last year. It's the 4th such survey that we've done during the time that we've existed. For those of you that don't know Real Estate Balance, we came into existence in October 2015. 7 senior women from the real estate industry coming together and saying it wasn't very good and they need to do something about it. I took over as Managing Director of Real Estate Balance, I always say on April Fool's Day in the middle of a pandemic, which is actually true, because I took over on the 1st of April 2020. And this is the 4th such survey that we've done. So, I mean, what this one is saying about the key findings that we found is the gender gap between middle management and senior leadership has not only persisted but actually worsened since our first survey in 2016, which is the very bad news. If you become a member of Real Estate Balance, your chief exec has to sign something we call our 10 CEO commitments, which are quite motherhood and apple pie, but are about, you know, running D&I in your organisation, not being on panels which aren't gender neutral and things like that. But one of the big sort of issues that we have at REB is making sure that once your CEO have signed those commitments, that actually they share them within their own organisations. And one of the things that came out of the survey that we did in September showed that actually our member organisations are getting much better at embedding the CEO commitments, and with the greatest improvement in diversity data gathering, tracking and reporting, which is difficult to do, so represents great improvement, and there's just been some discussion about data. Companies and employees, we run 2 surveys. We run an employer survey and an employee survey, and they both agree that social mobility, gender and ethnicity are the biggest EDI challenges, and I'm pleased that that's the case because those are the things that we concentrate on. And the other thing that came out of the survey is that hybrid working has been very positive for employee work-life balance, mental health and productivity, but it's more of a challenge in ensuring access to development opportunities and especially for connecting with colleagues. And men overall see hybrid working more negatively than women. So as I say, survey conducted between 1st September and 7th of October 2022. Sadly, sorry, I need the next slide, I do apologise. Sadly, the company responses for 2022 were slightly down from 2020, with 32 companies responding rather than 37 companies in 2020. But 70% of the company responses were from propcos, investment managers and law firms. And on the same basis, 69% of employee responses were from the same company types. And employee responses were up from 2020 with 756 employees against 589 in 2020. Next slide, please. Right, this slide actually shows the gender balance at board and male-female within a series of levels. And since our first survey in 2016, we've asked companies to report on gender balance at different levels. And what you see here is the reported female ratio at different levels over time. So we can see an improvement at board level from 20 to 30%, but it's been flat to declining since 2020. There's been a slight decline at senior leadership, but there's still a big gap from middle management to senior leadership. And there's relatively flat female ratios for middle management, qualified or equivalent, and graduate entry level. There's been a big drop in the female ratio for support and other, which I see as a very positive thing. And of all the people we asked, we only had a small group who either preferred not to identify their gender or preferred to self-describe. The next slide, please. The next slide shows the ethnic mix of employees, in terms of the employee survey, the Office of National Statistics figures, and then the 2011 census in London. So we've been asking employees about their ethnic background since 2020, and as it's based on employer respondents, it may not be fully representative and subject to response bias. And this is not information we ask companies for, mainly because we know that not enough would have the data in a consistent format. But here we compare ethnicity with public data for England and Wales as a whole and London. And we can see that our industry looks broadly in line for the country as a whole, but that given that much of our industry is London-centric, the London data suggests an opportunity for improvement. Right, the next slide is a very interesting one, because what it actually shows is that employee survey respondents are more privileged in the nation on 2 out of 3 measures of social mobility. We've got an increasing attention on social mobility, and we asked employees about indicators of socio-economic background for the first time. We asked 3 questions sourced from the Social Mobility Commission's Employers Toolkit on occupation of the main household earner, socio-economic background, the respondent's schooling, and whether or not a parent had attended university. The first 2 are an indication of privilege, and our industry does look more privileged on 2 of these 3 indicators. Higher socioeconomic backgrounds represent professional and managerial careers of the main household earner, and we have a much higher proportion, as you can see, having attended independent school than the national average. But contrast, we have a higher proportion being the first to attend university compared to the national average. So I think it's just an interesting, I mean, this is an International Women's Day event, but we've got this data, we think it's quite interesting. Next slide, please. I talked about the fact that if you join Real Estate Balance, your CEO has to sign 10 CEO commitments. And what did come out of this survey is that companies noticed, companies did report much better improvement in embedding the REB commitments in their own organisation. So companies noted the biggest improvement in diversity gathering, tracking and reporting to become fully embedded. That actually is very difficult to do, so that represents a great improvement. We see improvement in a number of commitments to full embedding, demonstrating and promoting the diversity business case, personally engaging with diverse workforces and promoting D&I and sharing good practice in groups. There's further improvement is being seen in sponsoring employees from diverse backgrounds. It appears there's been some slippage from fully embedding in changing mindsets by challenging bias and discrimination and insisting on diversity for recruitment and promotion. And we also see slippage in speaking only on panels with a minimum of one man and one woman, or one man and woman. There was no change in representing a diverse image and promoting companies, and influencing the supply chain remains a challenge. Influencing the supply chain is one of our priorities. Next slide, please. There is a disconnect between what employers think they're doing and what employees think they're doing. And despite 71% of companies reporting having publicised the CEO commitments, only 27% of employees were aware of them. It's worth noting that the employee survey was open to non-members, but it remains unlikely that such respondents would account for most of this gap. Of course, publication and awareness aren't the same. Is employee awareness of the commitments important? I would argue that it is. Next slide, please. So age, gender equality, disability, physical and ethnicity are the most tracked areas of diversity. So age, ethnicity and gender equality are the areas most tracked or planned to be tracked by companies. Social mobility is currently tracked by 38% of respondents to the survey, but 44% plan to track social mobility in the future. Categories of tracking are exactly as they were asked of companies in the survey. Some may be subject to interruption by a respondent, e.g. gender equality, tracking sexual orientation, whereas gender identity, tracking of trans, non-binary, etc. There's appetite to collect data in all of these areas, and REB has actually published a data guidance note to help on this. If anyone here wants a copy of that, we've got a panel outside, come and see us after this main event. Next slide, please. Companies and employees agree that social mobility, gender and ethnicity are the biggest EGI challenges, which is just as well, because they're the three things we're concentrating on in REB. And yes, they align, but they also align themselves with areas of highest dissatisfaction amongst employees. But as I said, they're also the three areas where REB is focused. Age and care and responsibilities did not score highly as major company challenges, but scored comparatively highly for employee dissatisfaction. Next slide, please. More women think that employers do not deal with gender equality issues well than is the case for men. Women also see diversity and inclusion as more important to their job satisfaction. Compared with 2020, we see increased importance by both men and women and decreased dissatisfaction, so good news. And the board level stood out for sort of high importance. Next slide, please. One thing we have seen is that 2022 saw an increase in discomfort discussing a career and life aspirations with managers, and we wonder whether or not that can be connected with new working patterns. And in the feedback, we identified 4 themes to why employees were uncomfortable: manager trust and connection, lack of authenticity, unsupportive culture, and threatened by sharing. And we've got individual comments, and one of the individual comments, which I've just presented this to all of our CEOs at a series of breakfast, and one of the comments was, "My line manager is incredibly difficult to speak at all. She does not make me feel supported or safe." I make that point just to show that women don't always get it right. Next one, please. Yeah, hybrid working is the new norm, with 91% of companies reporting the introduction of hybrid flexible home working, and 93% of employee respondents reporting that their employers has introduced hybrid flexible home working. Hybrid working has provided significant benefits for most in terms of work-life balance, overall mental health and productivity. Respondents said that support from their line managers was moderately net positive. And we've seen a slight net negative for access to development opportunities and significant negatives for ability to connect with colleagues. Men appear to find these new patterns slightly less positive than women, and in every category, men are less positive and more negative. Don't know whether or not that's contributed to the steep increase in men's discomfort in discussing career and life aspirations with their line managers. And when we look at these perspectives, by level, board and senior management seem to see these impacts less positively and more negatively compared with other levels, and that was borne out in all the CEO breakfasts that we did. Next slide, please. We asked companies what they saw as the biggest challenge for gender equality, and a lack of diverse candidates at middle management was cited, followed by low staff turnover and talent retention. But as we saw earlier, there are plenty of women at middle management level, and the drop-off happens at senior leadership. How is it true that the biggest challenge for gender equality is a lack of diverse candidates at middle management? Question for us all, I think. We also asked companies the same question for ethnicity and social mobility, and a lack of diverse candidates at middle management was also cited as the biggest challenge. Across all dimensions, managing family and career ranks low. So I ask the question, does that mean that the battle for these priorities has been won? I'm not sure it does, but I think it's interesting. And that flexible working has no responses obviously likely reflects the rise in hybrid working. So, next slide, please. We asked both companies and employees about programme success for increasing diversity and inclusion. We asked slightly different questions of the different audiences in the surveys. Companies were asked which one programme was most successful. Employees were asked to select up to 3 programmes that are or would be most successful. Diversity and inclusion working groups and action plans and enhanced maternity, paternity, shared leave are seen as much more successful by companies. Cultural behavioural change, talent development plans for women and minorities and flexible working are seen much more favourably by employees. Only about half of companies have cultural behavioural change or talent development plans for women and minorities. Management incentivisation for inclusive behaviours and cross-company mentoring both receive good mention from employees, but only a limited number of companies have these programmes at 34% and 16% respectively. Next one, please. And employees favour more senior engagement, whereas companies generally don't differentiate except for the supply chain. I've got through that in much quicker time than I would normally do. We've got a panel out, so we're outside, so when the whole thing, you know, the whole rest of this is over, anyone that wants to come and talk to us, please do so. But I think there's some quite interesting data there, which obviously is stuff that we all need. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Before I begin, could I just make a quick request? Could we get some glasses up on the table? Thank you very much. I'm going to quickly introduce myself before we talk about what organisations should be doing to advance gender equality. You might indeed wonder who I am. My name is Marsha Ramrip. I'm the former Director of Inclusion for REBA. Boo hiss. Architects and RICS. Actually, I'm not an architect, you might be somewhat relieved to hear. I'm one of those people that delivers and tries to deliver some behavioural cultural change that Sue just mentioned that employees seem to value over organisations. My company, Unheard Voice, we go into companies and we deliver a strategic inclusion change. So this is about the behavioural piece. Which hopefully we'll be talking about a bit in a moment. I had a 30-year career in broadcasting, and a lot of people ask me, well, how do you move from broadcasting into the built environment, and actually an inclusion in the built environment? And it hasn't been that big of a leap, because when I was doing my broadcasting, for me, it was always about how do we hear from people about the stories they want told? You know, how do we go into communities, hear from them about what it is that they want, and ensure that we are respecting and responding to that effectively? And I developed a lot of expertise around this, created my own consultancy, and then the job came up as Director of Inclusion at REBA. And a number of things went through my mind when I saw that role. The first was Stephen Lawrence, because, of course, he wanted to be an architect. And the second was, and it's funny we're in Westminster because a number of things went through my head, including many, many years ago when all the work that was now being done across at the palaces of Westminster was being discussed. It was being discussed on the radio. Could they actually move Parliament out of the palaces of Westminster, travel around the country, maybe even sit in a circle to discuss policy and governance? And on the radio, there was incredulous laughter. There was scoffing that somehow we could develop our policies in this way. And I remember listening to that and thinking, well, that's crazy. Maybe one of the reasons why we have this sort of us and them system is because it's so combative in that space. And if the space could inform a more collaborative way of doing things, then we might have a more collaborative way of living and working together. And so at that moment when I saw the job at REBA, thought if I could influence the creation of inclusive spaces, maybe I could influence the creation of an inclusive society. And I very much stick with that, and that's why I'm sticking to trying to work in the built environment across all the professions to be able to align what we're doing to help create strategic inclusive change. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank the first panel and Sue for really creating what I consider to be the inspirational piece. And we're now going to move to talking about the transformational piece. What do we do in order to create inclusive change? So I'm going to one by one introduce the panel. And the first person I'd like to introduce you to is Warren. Warren, if you could come up. Warren Stapley is the DE&I and Responsible Business Manager for Montague Evans. I wonder if all the other managers are irresponsible. Please come. Thank you, Warren. I'd also like to invite up Louise Ellis, who's the Chief People Officer at Gleeds. And we have Andy Pritchard, who's the Head of Legacy, Supply Chain and Diversity and Inclusion at Wilmot Dixon. And Lara Millward, the Head of Partnerships at Shine for Women. And finally, John Berry, who's the Director of Property Professional Services, Chief Valuer Group at the Valuation Office Agency. Now, what I'm going to do is, rather than getting them to do much of an intro, is get them to talk about what they do as part of the answers that we're going to talk about. And very interestingly, when we were having the conversation about what we were going to talk about today, something very interesting came up, and I'm going to start with it, and I'm going to start with it with John, actually, because we talked about representation, John. Representation matters. How are you addressing it?
I think in a number of different ways, actually, within the organisation, and particularly the focus around gender. So in terms of representation, certainly we've got one of the largest development pipelines within the industry. We've got about 450 people on different pipelines. And what we wanted to do was create a diverse range of pipelines so that anyone, irrespective of background, socio-economic, educational, race background, could become a chartered surveyor, and that creates diversity in itself. There's also a lot of different family-friendly policies that we have within the Valuation Office Agency, and I know that we're in 2023, but the bulk of childcare and indeed other types of care do rest with women still. So it's making sure that we're removing barriers that are presented by those things to enable women to develop within the organisation, become chartered surveyors and advance their careers. We also do a lot of championing and showcasing of women's achievements within the organisation. So I think it's really important to encourage aspiration within women, and they will see that within the organisation if they will see people like themselves in senior and successful roles, and that's what we want to showcase. So there was just a couple of examples there of some of the things that we're doing.
And Andy, at Wilmot Dixon, representation matters there as well. How successfully are you doing it there?
Yeah, it's been a long journey for us. We started probably in 2016, and we've seen some fantastic growth, going from around 20% to 31% women in our business. But actually, there's been huge improvement at senior management level as well. So I think every board in our business now has a woman. The executive board is almost 50-50. We've had some wonderful programs we've run, like our women's leadership program. We're actually the first cohort qualified in 2001. 50% of them are now in the senior management team already. We're seeing huge success, really. But yeah, we're seeing it at every level. One of the key data and stats we go through, actually, as we saw in a lot of the stats before, the support teams were probably where most of the 20% were at the start of our journey. So actually, we've tried to target the sort of technical aspects, as we call it, in our business. So surveying being one of them, construction management, and so on and so forth. And there we had very, very low statistics. So we actually brought on our career change program, which has been one of the biggest initiatives we've had in the last couple of years, where we know the industry just doesn't have enough people. We can't just try and pinch them from all of our competitors. We actually need to attract women from outside of our industry into our industry. We know intuitively that actually if you bring a senior manager from a different industry, they're not only going to very quickly fall into a really good role and do the role you want them to do, but actually they're going to come and challenge the norm. They're going to change how you think strategically. We already have in all these decision-making groups women from different areas, and now we're starting to get them from different industries, and we're just seeing our decision-making get better and better. And as we talked in the first panel, we do it because of the ethics in the first place, but actually it makes you more money, it makes you better decisions, it makes you a better business. So we're seeing it already very quickly.
It's a really, really important point there about actually the way that when you bring difference into a scenario, into an organisation, into a business, then there is something specific that needs to happen there, because representation matters, but it's not enough. You have to have the inclusive culture that you're bringing in if you're trying to address underrepresentation. And Lara, when we're thinking about it's not enough, that organisational inclusion competence, if you're addressing underrepresentation and you're looking to get more women into your organisation, get more people, intersectional women as well, people who face multiple layers of discrimination, they come in, they can be tokenistically placed in that. And then being the only in the room has its own challenges. What do you say is the piece that needs to be thought about a little bit more there?
That's a very good question, and I agree with you about the one person in the room sometimes. And just to talk a little bit about that one person in the room, I think sometimes we need to be the role models and lead the way, and sometimes people have to lead the way, so it might feel tokenistic, but that one person in the room can be a leader, and that's a wonderful thing to be. I think what needs to happen in organisations to make it more than representation is a real belief, an authentic belief, that there is a reward in the organisation for being inclusive. You know, we talked about habits earlier, making it a habit. If you want to make inclusion a habit in the company, the organisation needs to see reward in that. What reward is it for the organisation that we are more inclusive and diverse? Let's crack open those open and authentic conversations about the reward for the company in having inclusion, so that then you can say that championing is going to be a behaviour or a habit in the organisation. I'm going to champion inclusive behaviours and give men the language to do that, so they don't feel in threat state. We don't want men to feel threat state or out-group. We want to bring them in. We want to work together on making inclusion happen. So for me, it's very much about making behaviours and actions happen.
Warren, how would you say we need to make those behaviours and actions happen?
Well, there's no silver bullet, as we all know. I think there's no panacea here for all ills. There's no one thing, unfortunately, that solves the problem. So you have to think in terms of systems. You certainly can't be thinking in terms of the women. There's a problem with the women. You can't fix the women. There's no need to fix women. Women are fine. It's actually, you need to fix the system. And in fact, actually, sort of like, I see this over and over again. For example, sort of I was DEI manager at Montague Evans, and I report to our HR director, who is a woman. And when we go out for our team dinners and everything else like that, we have a little bet between us, and it's become quite amusing because the bill always comes to me. And in fact, actually, I can busy myself on my phone, I can look away, I can do something else like that, but on a team of 9, I'm the only man, the bill will be presented to me. And there is a prevailing belief throughout firms within the built environment that's an insidious and false narrative about the capability and competence of the women who are within that industry. And unfortunately, the old dinosaurs, you know, the pale male stereotypes, you know, who basically form the apex predators and the excos and so on of these organisations, tend to share those beliefs. And unfortunately, careers matter right now. They mattered yesterday, they matter today, they'll matter tomorrow. And you don't have the time necessarily to wait for these old boys just to fall off the end of the production line and retire into oblivion when they can no longer make decisions affecting your career. So we have to change behaviours now, and therefore I think that ultimately, to answer the question, it has to be attacking top-down leadership, because I know full well that no DEI, no DEI initiative, no measure of inclusion ever succeeds without leadership buy-in, and therefore we have to go to the top of the organisation and work accordingly.
So, there's nothing wrong with women, Louise. You'd be pleased to hear. In your role then, you know, from the top of the organisation, how can you, how have you experienced that change? How have you helped facilitate it?
It's been a really interesting journey for me at Gleeds. I joined 5 years ago. I'm in my 6th year. I've come from a retail HR background, so the gender diversity and the overall mix within retail was much more diverse than I've ever experienced in this industry. So I'm a novice to the construction industry and the consultancy industry, but what attracted me to Gleeds was the challenge. I suppose I've never been shy of saying what I think. And I was the only person in the room. I was the only female in the room at the top of the tree. I now have a female friend on the board, so I'm not the only one. And the way, I've never approached diversity and inclusion, as an initiative. It's more about a way of working and a cultural need. I've almost approached it that it's not essential to be focusing directly on improving the gender balance and making sure that behaviours are right, values are right, people are challenged if their behaviour is wrong or they say the wrong thing, even from the lowest level up to the most senior level. And I've had some fairly challenging conversations with the leaders in our business about behaviours and comments and so on. I feel very welcome at Gleeds. I feel very, very secure, and I feel as though I belong. And that's something that some of the other panellists had mentioned about having that sense of belonging to be able to be yourself. And that is how I live my life at work. I am myself. And I encourage everyone, male, female, anybody, to be themselves at work and be comfortable with who they are and what they do, and have that confidence that they're brilliant at their jobs. And it should be, life should be better for everybody, which I know is a naive view, maybe, but it's helped me progress.
There are a couple of points I'd just like to reflect on there. The first is that there's a quote that I tend to use. I'm always one for a quote, by the way. Grunert and Whitaker in 2015 wrote a book called School Culture Rewired. And there's a quote from there that says, "The culture of any organisation is shaped by the worst behaviours that leaders are willing to tolerate." And that is true. I also feel that we can flip that, and so what I tend to say is the culture of any organisation can be shaped by the best behaviours that leaders are willing to demonstrate. And I feel that, just speaking to some of the points here, that the existence of policies, procedures and practices don't guarantee their use. And so the behavioural piece, the cultural piece, led from the top, is really quite an important one for us to try to dig under. So, John, when you develop these processes and these schemes, how do you ensure that these women coming through the organisation are properly supported with the right behaviours?
So I think kind of one of my mantras, just going back to the last point, was the one from General Morrison from the Australian Army, when they had a real problem with sexism some years ago, and his mantra was, the behaviour that you walk past is the behaviour that you condone. I kind of really like that, because, and that's what I say to people within our organisation, because it's quite easy to turn a blind eye, and we don't change cultures and change behaviours by turning a blind eye and walking past certain types of behaviour. So certainly that's kind of one of my mantras, and that's what we say a lot. But I think it's, for me, it's about creating the right kind of culture within the organisation. So it's within things like terms and conditions. It's about making sure that we provide the right support. So within our organisation, we've got a different variety of gender groups focusing on race and belief and gender and sexuality, and it's about driving actions through representation from within the network to help kind of change things, which is really good. And a number of different initiatives around things like social mobility and thinking about the intersectionality and crash with caring and other aspects of the sort of race situation that we've got, and we can start to help kind of mould and drive that through some of the measurement that we do within the organisation, making sure that representation is there. So, and in other ways to help kind of progress women through into kind of senior positions, we hold a number of things, such as doing things like career conversations, where. And I've had these conversations with different individuals within the organisation, and you don't see the aspiration there until you have that career conversation. You can highlight to people what's the possible, what's the art of the possible, starting to understand the barriers that people have got and starting to dismantle those in those kind of one-to-one conversations. Social mobility is another aspect as well. So we've joined the Social Mobility Index, which has been fabulous, which is another intersectional point about gender as well. And making women just feel safe and valued in the organisation, so they can thrive there. And as I mentioned before as well, it's about creating those role models and provide an aspiration for women to see women in senior positions and in technical and decision-making positions at high levels in the organisation, so that people that can then see, well, that's what I can achieve. There are people in my image in the organisation that are really kind of developing themselves in the organisation.
Yeah, and that's why it was quite interesting to see Sue's graph, where actually the support level functions, there are closer to 50% women on those, and trying to get increasing women across the leadership positions, which is what it sounds like you're doing. Louise, to come to you there about that dismantling piece of the barriers, that takes like a will and a motivation to dismantle those. I mean, what's your view on how that's done?
I think it's about facing into them, it's understanding them in the first place and not being phased to have the conversation. The subject of diversity and inclusion didn't exist in Glees before I joined. I set up the D&I steering group in 2019. I now chair the FIR Council, and the FIR Council is something that is new. FIR is fairness, inclusion and respect. And we feel that by creating an environment that is fair, inclusive and respectful, we will gradually improve the diversity within our workforce. And I think by approaching the subject in that way, it makes it more achievable, excuse me, and less threatening for people. And I think it's walking the talk, and it's not just the lip service. It's identifying behaviours that are right, celebrating those behaviours, and calling out those behaviours that are not right, and how they could be improved or changed or tweaked throughout the organisation.
Laura, can I pick up on that point around threat? Because there is an element of, when you're talking about these issues, there is fear, there's discomfort, there's defensiveness. How do we get those who are responsible to lean into that discomfort, defensiveness, and challenge feel the fear and do it anyway?
Well, I think, as we've discussed already today, we know why we have to do this, right? We've talked about better profitability, better decisions, a better future for everyone. So I think why we have to do this, everyone knows now. And we need the how and the how to make it happen. And I think having those conversations, authentic, real conversations, and having men and women in the room together to talk about this, and to get rid of the threat state is really to say, you know, leaders now need empathy. I think you'd have to be hiding under a rock if you hadn't heard CEO being described as the chief empathy officer now. And by being empathetic, you're standing in her shoes. How is she thinking and feeling? What does she need? For me today, looking at this, look at these wonderful women in the room, right? This is the future. I'd love to know what you're thinking and feeling if I was a senior leader in your company. What do you need? Tell me. Let me learn from you. That's what Satya Nadella says, doesn't it? It's not the know-it-alls anymore, it's the learn-it-alls. Let's learn from each other. Let's remove that threat state and say there's more reward in the organization if we move together and progress. In the built environment, we're building a better world, aren't we? You're going out building a better world for a diverse world. So let's take that and survey our own teams. Are they diverse? Do they represent the world that we're building for? And let's build that together by being empathetic, understanding what you need, and changing policies and procedures to lift you up.
I want you as my CEO, so yeah, she's open for, yeah. Andy, if I can come to you and ask, you know, very clear idea, what we do, what this profession does, shapes our world. So important then that we have those voices in the profession to inform how it's shaped. It's the reason why I'm in the profession, as I explained. So what does that, you know, what do you do as part of your processes to get this diversity, be it women, other underrepresented groups, into your organisation? How can you ensure that their voices are properly heard rather than them just being assimilated into the way you have always done things?
Yeah, definitely. Within our organisation, and at the start of our gender journey in 2016, we always have focus groups, and we listen to men, women, we get people from outside our business as well. And we make sure we've probably got the most focus groups than we have building sites at sometimes. But we always go in there. But actually, you talk about the entire industry. So Wilmot Dixon, 50% of our people are working on our building sites today. There's 40,000 builders on our building sites. And we do run lots of campaigns and make sure we're doing stuff. But actually what we need to do is change the builders, because that's the mass, that's where all the people are. So we've started by, as we made a pledge to be 50-50 by 2030, we said, well, actually it's only 1% of our builders currently, which is industry standard, who are female, back in 2020. And we said we want to see a 1% growth year on year. So by 2025, we want to see 5%, 1 in 20, instead of 1 in 100 of our builders to be women. Tradespeople. Not necessarily going into stereotypical female jobs where we see most of our females are currently cleaning our buildings at the end, as opposed to actually being tradespeople building them. So then part of the structure is our inductions. So we do everything digitally. We've got digital profiles on people. It's all safe data, obviously. But the first day at Wilmot Dixon, the first thing you hear is about diversity and about inclusion, about how we set our stall out. But you can train every builder one at a time, and probably that'll cover 50% of the industry over the course of a year. But what you need to have is female tradespeople. You need to see it. They need to be working with them. That's how they really understand and respect. Like I have, I've got 2 colleagues sat in the audience today who I worked with for 5 years, and that's how part of the reason I learned that actually women are amazing to have in your team, because when they challenged me and thought differently, it meant that our teams made better decisions, and the teams profited from that. And we really need to see our tradespeople actually changing, because at the moment it's 99% men.
Yeah, and Warren, this is the issue, isn't it? Because you've got maybe great organisations where you have these values, trying to live inclusivity within them, then they go out to site and it's a different story. So how do we ensure inclusivity when out on site as well as being in the office?
I mean, again, I can't help but come back around and around, no matter how many times I go around this block, to organisational culture. What's happening at the top of the organisation, where the willpower is, what the power structure looks like. I mean, you only have to look at the fact that a few decades ago, there was the will to send men, invariably, but eventually people, to the moon. So they did. And there was the will to send an object onto Mars and bring it back. So they did that too. But you'd think, for example, that if there was the will to pay and promote women fairly and keep your damn hands off your bodies as well whilst you're doing it, that you could also achieve that as well. But actually, you know, until there is the genuine display of said will to achieve those things, and until there is a speak-up culture, a call-out culture, and actually addressing that and calling it what it is, and addressing the fragility of those at the top, because as we know, equity always looks like injustice to oppressors, then not much is going to change. So that's why, of course, I said, you know, we focus on the leadership, but also recognising actually that amidst that fragility, and, you know, sort of obviously this is before we get into sort of intersectional analysis, which of course is incredibly important, but that is really where it's at. So that's outside the office, that's inside the office, that's actually sort of, you know, in the air that we breathe, it's everything that we have to do. So if we're talking about being values-led as an organisation, that cultural change, that willingness to change, that willingness to set yourself, not centre yourself and get out of the way and centre marginalised individuals has to run through everything you do and say.
Yes, and just to rephrase one of the things you just said there, I've heard it described as when all you have known is privilege, equality feels like oppression. And it's quite a challenging viewpoint to present to those who uphold the status quo and who have never been challenged by equality. Equality feels like oppression. And so to maintain the status quo is more comfortable. So, Lara, you know, we've talked about wanting to change these conversations. We look in this room. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see you far more clearly. A lot of women in the room, and we're wondering, where are the men, right? Where are the men who should be listening to this conversation, the ones who should be listening to this conversation, so that they can take away some learning to do things differently? Lara, I mean, how do we reach the people who are not in the room?
What a good question.
Yeah, fix it. I mean, I obviously have my views. Go for it.
Yeah. How do we fix that? Well, it is a shame, actually, that there aren't more men in the room, because it's much better if we're in the conversation together, and that conversation is open and honest and authentic, because we want them, as we talked about before, as our allies, as our champions. I'd love to hear what your fix-it is.
Oh gosh, right, okay. So from my viewpoints, I think that when I talk about how to create culture change and behaviour change in organisations, I talk about the statistics and the research and the academic background that not only does diversity and addressing underrepresentation matter, but really importantly, diversity on its own doesn't equal some of those amazing outcomes that they talked about in the first panel. Diversity on its own actually can cause underperformance in a team where there isn't inclusive cultures. So you need diversity plus inclusion to equal all of those business benefits of 8 times more innovative, 6 times better business outcomes, at least twice as engaged and productive teams. And so any organisation worth its salt that wants to give a return to its shareholders shouldn't be asking why I'm not doing this. They should be asking, how do we do it? And beyond that as well is this sense of really acknowledging that change is never easy. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, it can cause defensiveness, it can cause fear. But the cost of not doing it is far higher than the benefits of actually going down that path. And very much with a sense of giving leaders the tools, which you check out my website. And seriously, giving leaders the tools to be able to navigate, to have the behavioural framework, to be able to do that is not a process of confrontation, but just acknowledging that it will be uncomfortable. So, but that's a whole different panel. Yeah, definitely, it's possible. It's possible. It's just, but really importantly, and really importantly around RICS and its role in leadership to be able to help demonstrate this. It's not enough to just say that you're going to have an EDI committee. You need the leadership and governance to be supportive. You need to give your EDI teams time. You need to give them the proper expertise. Agency. Agency is so important that, you know, the EDI teams need to have the ear of the highest paid person in the room, and money. You know, if you want to make money, you've got to invest. It doesn't just happen just like that, and it takes expertise as well as passion.
And just to build on that about fixing it and the change. So, as we all know from the neuroscience of habits, you will never get to change unless you see a reward in that habit. A habit needs to have a routine and a reward, and then it becomes a regular behavior. So let's come back to that reward for the organization. Helping senior leaders, talking to them, having those conversations. The reward for the organization is you retain the talent that you seek. You are more diverse, like the world that you are building for. There is rewards that we need to keep coming back all the time and taking people away from threat state. We don't want men to feel threatened. In threat state, people will back off and not have those conversations. Let's focus on the reward for the women in your organization and for the organization in the current world.
I'm very much an advocate as well for pushing at those doors that are already slightly open, because we can expend a lot of effort on leaning against those firmly shut doors. So, John, how do you enable people to push at your door? Pardon the expression.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just going back to the business case point as well, is that we recruit or need to recruit about 100 or so surveyors a year just to meet our obligations and statutory requirements, because we're public sector rather than private. So industry average for women is 19%. Our population across the agency is 52%. 40% of our recruitment for qualified surveyors is 40% women in terms of gender for qualified surveyors, and about 46% on our development programs, which we've got about 450 people out of a workforce of under 4,000. So we've got quite big proportions of shoes to fill actually going forward. And actually, one of the things that we've done with creating, it's about opening doors in terms of access to qualifications to become surveyors. It's about the culture that we've talked about. It's about the role modelling, social mobility, a number of different factors has enabled us to be quite successful in building our gender parity upwards. Also things like pay equality as well that we're starting to focus on. And pay equality we do focus on in terms of looking at pay agreements in the annual pay round to make sure that there's no inverted sort of discrimination that occurs with that, and all the types within the pay systems we know that can happen. So it's those things that I've talked about really. It's about terms and conditions, it's about how we develop people, it's about the lots of cultural things that we've talked about before, and particularly is around the role modelling as well that I've also mentioned. So it's those four things for the valuation office is about where we've been opening the doors, and removing barriers actually is some of the key things for us.
Before we go to questions from the floor and so on, Warren, I just want to quickly ask you, it can be a little bit dehumanizing to suggest that, you know, with all the identities that I have, if you employ me, if you progress me, then I'm going to create more money for you. It's just about a business case. Do you have any words of wisdom around tapping into the more moral and human case?
Well, yes, for starters, let's stop talking about business case as far as your identity markers are concerned. We'll start there. We can talk about business cases if I want to have a discussion about whether or not I want to do a strategic hire into my advisory team or my planning team, or I can talk about business cases about technical aspects of a firm's offering. But anything to do with your identity and your lived experience is valid in its own right. I shouldn't need to attend working with respect training. I shouldn't need to attend anything along those lines. I shouldn't require business case narrative to recognise the inherent validity of those things. And just vice versa, for example, myself as a disabled bisexual man, those things are valid in their own rights without more discussion. So in terms of words of wisdom, in terms of sort of alternative language, I prefer stakeholder trust. I prefer trust as a currency in terms of the fact that actually, I glaze over every time I see some sort of, crappy slide about sort of 17% more productivity or whatever, because that's not relevant to me, my business, your lives, my lives. I don't care what McKinsey did in San Francisco 8 years ago, I don't care. What I do care about, however, is sort of what's happening on the shop floor, so to speak, right now, how it feels to be you right now. That matters. And therefore, when I think of assets of inclusion, I'm not interested in necessarily rewards to the organisation or business cases. I'm interested in actually what steps do we need to take? What's the strategy? What's the roadmap to build individual stakeholder trust in relation to those facets? And as soon as then you start compounding those difficulties with intersection analysis, as of course we should do, you need to have deeper and deeper and more real discussions about that trust. Because that's really sort of, what we should be looking at here. We should be looking at deepening trust, across organisations. And that's not that thing about, our company's a family. It's not, it's a business. But still, the human element needs to work on trust, not business cases.
Yeah, thank you. And I think really importantly, this is very crucial, I have to say, to my personal work in this area. And I've really struggled to try to embrace this idea of the business case. But where I've ended up is that with any of this work, it's never either or. It's got to be this and. So we respect people's humanity and identities, whilst also understanding that with that nature of privilege, those who don't understand the issues around identity will need to understand the business case first. That's where I've got to with that. But it is a struggle when you have to have that conversation. I'd like to open the floor up to questions, and we've got a number of hands going up, which is great. So we've got one, two, and then one back there and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, if I may. Thank you.
Hiya. I have a question about some of the things that we've touched on that I think are really easy for organisations to do, especially the larger ones, as we've mentioned, have more budget for this sort of stuff. Policies, everyone and their dog has one. EBRGs, it's a great excuse for corporates. They create an EBRG, they think they've solved the problem because now everyone can talk to each other. And then what I find, and I'm very cynical on this, by the way, you might have noticed already, is that when you suggest something really controversial, like maybe making promotion rounds that happen every year in a lot of organisations, that people can put themselves forward if they think they're relevant, rather than, a whole bunch of white men in leadership going into a room and discussing who they think has filled the criteria and then putting those people forward, like something really controversial like that. All of a sudden, those changes are suddenly a lot more scary than creating a policy or an EBRG. And I think those are the things that are actually the barriers. And I'm not seeing the organisations actually proactively tackling those things.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So yeah, we do all internal promotions are advertised internally, and they then make sure we have so anybody can apply for it, and we make sure we've got a gender diverse group on it because it is really important. I agree fully. I don't know whether it's worked perfectly or not, but that's the first step we've had in it to make sure that everybody in our business gets the opportunity to go for those senior roles.
Go, John.
And as well, in Valuation Office Agency, we follow civil service recruitment roles. So there's lots of aspects in there that we've looked at, trying to remove, kind of, I suppose, accidental discrimination within the kind of wording of job trawls and things like that, asking for certain periods of experience and those sorts of things which can be gender biased. But also we've got things like gender mix on panels and those sorts of things. Also, we have started to look at our managed moves within senior leaders and technical leaders within the organisation, and how we can follow civil service fair and open recruitment rules, but actually focus on achieving gender balance in our different business areas within the Valuation Office. And we're starting to do some of that now, and that's really starting to work pretty well, I think.
Thank you. Third row back, the lady in black, I think.
There's been a lot of talk about supporting women, particularly when it comes to raising a family. But I think part of the problem in the industry is that men who are in senior positions or working their way up the organisation feel afraid to actually make that decision to take time out to support their partner, to raise children. I suspect when Peter made the decision on the last panel to support his partner 20 years ago, that certainly wouldn't have been the norm. And I know for myself, I've been in the industry for 37 years. I've had 4 children whilst I've been working. And my husband definitely would not have taken time out because he would have felt that would have placed his career at risk. And the understanding between us was one of us kind of had to take the back seat. And it's taken me, I took some time out to have children, and I felt it set my career back. I feel I've clawed my way back there now, but it's taken, it's been a challenge. Do you think it's important to support men in the same way that you're supporting women, to enable them to take the time that they need to have a life outside of work?
Louise.
It's a really interesting point, and something that I strongly feel is valid. I think men should have absolutely the same attitude to bringing up children as women. I'm in the lucky position where my husband has given up work to help support the family, and my career has kind of gone up as a result of that. I've had 2 children, I took maternity leaves. I came back into the organisations at the level that I left them, and just kind of dogmatically progressed to where I wanted to be. And I think the levelling up challenge in business is important, because I think flexible working, I think all of the things that we talk about for women have to be strongly promoted for men, because if men drop their hours, that's going to help women. But it's going to be a more balanced workforce. And that's something that we are and do actively promote at Gleeds. So our flexible working approach is not targeted to women. It's targeted to the whole organisation, and we're 70% male, 30% female. And we've seen great uptake from men in reducing their hours, changing their working patterns, increasing their caring responsibilities. So we're tackling it from a slightly different way to support the men, maybe more so than the women, but the women as well.
Thank you. Can I take the question? There was one right at the back.
Hi, thank you. My name's Amber, and I'm a senior QS at a company called The Arch Company. For context, I'm not very young, but when I was younger and new to the industry, a graduate, I worked on site, although my role generally was office-based. But when I worked on site, and Marta, I thought your point about site versus office-based situations was quite interesting because of this. I did face some quite misogynistic comments, but because of being a graduate and not wanting to compromise my progression and being away from the office environment, although I worked for a huge corporate global organisation at the time, I didn't really have anyone to turn to. I was the only female in the office at the time. And I just wondered if you could give advice to younger me to help other younger people about organisations or groups or people that you could turn to, if not your own organisation, in that context?
Did you hear the question?
It reminds me actually sort of very early on in my career, because just before I came into DEI, I was a corporate finance lawyer and still am a solicitor actually, but in terms of background actually, sort of when I was a trainee lawyer, I used to see sort of casual and overt misogyny all the time. For example, I would be given task after task after task, whereas my female colleagues would be left bereft of such work, and the explanation was always something along the lines of, and I can quote actually one from 2010, that was, well, I don't really bother giving work to the women because they just drop out and have babies. And this was a senior associate at the time, who I can now verify as an equity partner at another city firm. So you can see, going back to that point about power structures, those beliefs that grow up across the corporate ladder and so on, and what it leaves, unfortunately, is those entering the professions, and indeed sort of those lower down, those echelons of power, in a bit of a problematic place, because in fact, you know, sort of the situation that you're talking about there, misogyny, and in fact, in a woman of colour, misogynoir, which of course is even worse, you're actually sort of not necessarily, you don't have necessarily the psychological safety to be able to say to that powerful individual, I don't like that. I, for example, as a trainee lawyer at the time, didn't actually call out this senior associate. I would have been too afraid to do so. I didn't have the political capital. So what you then have to do is sort of decide, am I just going to sit with this? Am I going to tolerate it? Sort of, is it one of those microaggressions that I'm just going to kind of live with and just kind of, and so on. But actually, I think that we have to be moving towards cultures now where we don't tolerate this kind of thing anymore, where we speak out about this thing, but we do it in a way actually that where you actually take it to somebody who you know was a safe sounding board. Now, that person or persons is not necessarily HR, especially as a woman of colour. Because in fact, actually, sort of like that you're ending up in that situation where gaslighting is rife, and you end up having discussions about, well, are you sure they intended it that way? Are you sure you're not being oversensitive? And all of that utter BS. And unfortunately, that's not helpful, because it actually makes you feel worse, and now it feels like there's a mark against your name. So you don't necessarily, unless there's sort of good safety there, be making a beeline for HR, because that can actually compound a problem. But what we hope is that there's going to be people, whether it's even outside the organisation, but somebody that you can unburden that knowledge to and actually canvass a wide variety of views, if only to satisfy yourself that, no, this isn't okay, this isn't actually my imagination, and then go from there.
I just want to say at this point that probably there are some HR departments that need some PR. I'm sure Gleeds isn't one of them. I'm going to just take one final question because we're really tight for time. We're really, and it was over here on the far left. I'm sure, just like your politics, that we can probably take. That was a poor joke. Sorry. You can just take a final question before wrapping up.
My name's Lucy, and I'm a director at a company called Dalcor McLaren. So it's a really cool company. They're progressive, they're innovative. And at the junior levels, we have more females than men coming through, which is fantastic. But it wasn't until 2021 where I became their first female surveying director. So we now have another one, which is quite recent. But we've got a massive gap at the top, and it's not from lack of culture or positive mindset. So the men that I work with, and they're mostly all men, are wonderful. And they are really positive about the future of gender equality and equity. But what can we do more as a business? We're doing loads of good stuff already, but how can we close that gap?
Who would like to take it?
I wouldn't mind starting off. So that was exactly the problem we had with our career change program. So we had young trainees coming through the business at 50-50, but it would take till 2040 in order to get them into the senior management, which is why we said, look, we're going to have to go to other industry here and bring in people, because if you've got potentially a woman who's got 10 years experience in a different industry, she's already going to be doing most of the stuff you need at senior management level anyway, and there's only a tiny bit of training you need to do in that technical expertise. So I would say definitely look outside the industry.
We're going to have to bring it to a close, I'm afraid. But I'd like to end with the thought that inclusion isn't about other people and their characteristics or identities. It's about us and our behaviours. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, here to make brief introductions to their networks. First, welcome to the stage, Vanessa Curtis.
Hello, I'm Vanessa. I'm the chair and founder of Ability RE. Ability RE are quite a new organisation. We set up officially last year with the specific aim of driving inclusion and awareness for people with disability, neurodiversity, mental ill health or long-term health conditions within the real estate and built environment sectors. So we cover not only surveying, but architects, planners, construction, facilities management, everything like that. We're working at a couple of different levels. We think it's really important that we have a free-to-join support network for individuals. The reason that's important is because so many people with a disability or a neurodiversity or a health condition are afraid to speak up, particularly within their own organisation, for the stigma that they think is attached to that or any negative impact on career progression, that kind of thing. So we have a free-to-join support network for individuals. Look us up. We're also working with organisations on progressing their DEI objectives in that space, and hopefully also with the governing bodies. We're working with Sybil because she's awesome, and hopefully with some of the other governing bodies around trying to get some best practice and guidance out there around neurodiversity, disability, mental health, that kind of thing. So if anyone would like to know more, we've got loads of great events coming up, by the way. I'm out there with a pull-up banner. Come and find me and I'll fill you in.
Thank you, Vanessa. And now please welcome to the stage, Priya Shah.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya and I am the founder and director of BAME in Property. We are an organisation that started off as a networking group just over 5 years ago, and it was very much about bringing people from ethnic minority backgrounds together in our industry to hold mainly networking events, but to just really start that conversation about race and ethnicity. And honestly, 5 years ago, no one talked about it. People really shied away from even describing someone as a black woman, for example. People still have challenges with those kind of words and that kind of language, but over the years, we've really evolved as our society has evolved as well. So during the pandemic, we started an online community because we couldn't hold face-to-face events. After the tragic murder of George Floyd, we had an influx of just messages, just so much demand and just questions from the industry that we started evolving into a company. And that's when we started offering more services. So we now have corporate packages, and we go into companies and we hold workshops, lunch and learns. We advise on equity, diversity and inclusion, but from that ethnicity perspective. So today we still hold networking events. We've got lots of events coming up this year with some of our corporate partners and those who we are not corporate partners with as well. So do click on the QR card, sign up, become a member. We put out some really creative and interesting content pretty much every day. If you follow us on our social media, you'll see that we are churning out social media content, sign up to our newsletter. We really want the industry to get involved, but we really want those from non-ethnic minority backgrounds to get involved, because we don't just want to preach to the converted, we want to preach to everybody. So thank you, and I'll be out there as well if you have any questions, so please do come and chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. And next to the stage, please welcome Rumbi Nambaretti.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to read from my phone. So I'm here representing Black and ethnic minority professionals in construction. We started in 2019, and we've grown to a network of over 20,000 professionals, and we have over 30 corporate companies. So we aim to increase the participation of Black and ethnic minority individuals in the built environment, and we do this via a different number of channels. So we do these things called careers in construction campaigns, where we approach companies. We want to speak to people that are Black and from ethnic minority backgrounds, and we do billboards. So we've had 7 billboards with Clear Chanel. that we display across prime locations in London, and we're trying to expand outside of London. We run social media campaigns targeting the younger crowd on the likes of Instagram, TikTok. So we come into companies, we interview you, you talk about your career as a way of essentially making the industry more visible to our communities where traditionally we steered more towards being lawyers, doctors, finance. So we want to highlight the construction industry as an industry that is attractive. We run networking events, including the largest one that we do, which is the BPIC Awards, where we celebrate diversity and inclusion, and we run it yearly, and we have an attendee list of 500 plus people that turn up to that. We help organizations fulfill their recruitment needs as we have a large network. So they come to us, they advertise roles on our platforms, but we also have a service where we go out there and we look for candidates for them within our network. We do consultations helping organizations with their D&I agenda. We run workshops, we write impact reports for you with recommendations for the business, and we also help them build up development programs that are culturally informed. I think that's a small snapshot of what we do at BPIC Network, and like everybody else, I'm going to be out there if you want to speak a little bit more about what we do.
Thank you, Rumbi. And now please welcome Ali Reid.
Hi, I'm Ali Reid. I represent Black Women in Real Estate, which is a networking committee comprised of Black women. When my friend Hannah was trawling through LinkedIn in 2020, it was because she was noticing that our friends were leaving the industry. And so when I received her invitation to sort of network and have my experience validated, I actually existed in my profession, she asked me some questions because I've been here for 17 years. And I said to her, well, I don't know, Hannah. All I know is they give us boxes to tick, and I tick all of them. I am a very special butterfly. So I don't bother representing any particular group. I just get on with it and figure out things like the men will respect me enough to put away their page free if I'm on site all the time, even if that's uncomfortable. Now I work for Landsec and I'm an investment manager, and that means that I take data and I tell stories that support us achieving our net zero carbon goals in 2030, or deciding whether or not a property should remain in the current use that it is, or whether to sell it or to change its use. And Hannah and I have had many conversations which have come to the point where we've realized that actually we might leave, and we want to know if this is a pattern, because it kind of feels like it because our faces aren't here. And faced with the threat that the validation of my existence, that I didn't just catch in a glimpse of my reflection in a piece of steel my company had built, that inspired a kind of audacity and entrepreneurialism that meant that now Black Women in Real Estate is out campaigning and representing. What that means for me is I take that skill set of telling stories from data, and I go and talk to senior leaders, and I ask them, are you sure that your senior women only reflecting other professions is correct? What I mean by that is, if on your board, the senior leader who is female is a HR professional or an accounting professional, is that actually a surveyor that I can look up to and model my career after? Should I keep going? I also ask them questions like, are you sure that they're not applying, or are you just listening to the recruitment companies saying that we don't know anybody? So we've created a database, and we've created connections with recruitment companies. And if you want to meet diverse special butterflies, we've got them. There's a lot of us, and we're very talented. The other thing we do is harass people like Sybil, who are very, very patient. And we ask Sybil, if I ticked all the boxes, how come when you did your Bichard review, you didn't give him any numbers? Because I kind of need to support my story with the data. And Sybil's brave. And so I'm working with her now to create a data-led platform. And we're going to use that to create some actual concrete progress. Because I don't actually like cocktail parties. So BDI Brewery is building a network of allies. We happen to be called Black Women in Real Estate simply because we are Black women. That's it. It's not exclusive. We just have a special lens on what it is to be a Black woman and to be audacious and stubborn and entrepreneurial enough to still be here after 17 years. So I'll be out there.
Thank you, Ali. And now please welcome to the stage Kelly Canterford.
You're always a tough one to follow. My name's Kelly Canterford. My pronouns are she and her. I am the co-chair of Freehold, which is one of the networks in the real estate industry that supports LGBT people to be themselves. It's great to be up here to think that last year when we were talking about International Women's Day, we were talking about breaking the bias, asking us to be aware of those unguarded comments that we have. And this year's message is to embrace equity. And I think that's a reminder that equity and equality are different. And that's what we're here for Freehold. It was created 12 years ago by David Mann and Celine Fazel. They realised that they'd been hiding part of themselves while working together on a particular contract. That part of their identities, that they were both gay men, both had husbands, meant that the environment they were working in was not equitable. They couldn't be themselves. Their tools weren't there for them to just exist as themselves, very much as the people you've heard before me. And that was it. We were created to bridge that gap. We were created to provide a place where LGBT people could be themselves, to meet other people from the community. It's a free-to-join network. We're there to help educate people, answer questions. We've got a mentoring program. We are very much around supporting other businesses. We've helped other businesses create their own networks. We'll be out there. We just want to be part of this whole organisation to make people understand that you can be gay, you can be Black, you can be neurodiverse, you can be disabled, but you can be a surveyor. So let's all support this and change the industry.
Thank you, Kelly. And to introduce the final network, please welcome Rosemary Silver.
Sorry, I did provide this PowerPoint presentation because I wanted to show you some pictures, so I'm just going to have to show you from my laptop. I am here to represent my membership of the RICS and NAWIC. Because the RICS doesn't have a women's group, I joined NAWIC. So that is an organisation that started in America. This is our logo. Started in 1953 in Fort Worth, Texas, for women working in construction who had no support. It later became international, and I'm a member and vice chair of the London group. So this was a Zoom conference with the USA and UK in COVID. So one advantage of COVID was the Zoom networking. But we organise a lot of site visits. This is to Battersea a couple of years ago. This was the renovation of Liberties London. That is the architect's tale and the conservator's tale. And not many people would know that at top of Liberties, there is a 24-karat gold weather vane. Business breakfast meeting, 2 walking tours of Islington Garden Squares and Clerkenwell by moonlight for Christmas, and networking drinks. In January, our former chair, Christina, led a fabulous evening workshop making jewellery, and this is from building materials and recycled products, and that's my necklace. This is an event that NAWIC gave in November 2019. Again, like today, full of women. We had 190 women here for our conference. And the keynote speaker was a structural engineer who organised the infrastructure of the Olympics while heavily pregnant with twins. That's the NAWIC committee in the RICS. This is a normal building surveying conference, 95% white men. I suppose you could say I could have pulled. These are the female chartered surveyors, and you see not many out of the 190 because the RICS had no knowledge of the number of women. I'm hoping that's changing now. So what I say is this. In 2023, women still only make up 18% of the RICS membership. The RICS is still the only property and construction profession with no women's group. This is why the RICS needs its own women's group. So let's make it happen.
Many thanks, Rosemary. And to make closing remarks for today's conference, please welcome to the stage Sybil Taunton.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today, both in person and online. I appreciate your time. Appreciate we've gone over time. And so thank you for bearing with us today as we got a bit of a late start. A lot of really great conversations today. Conversations I know we've heard over and over and over again, and I'm not going to pretend like we haven't. That's something that Paloma, she's my diversity analyst that has worked really hard behind the scenes to pull this event together today with our events team. Her and I, when we took on our positions, myself in April of last year, Paloma in August, we have been on a journey of listening, as we should. And so if we have not heard from you, please find me in any way possible, and I will listen. We need to do better. I can't promise that Paloma and I can solve all of the problems. And so that's where my call to action today is 20 governing council seats are open. Please fill them. We've got 2 senior vice president roles that are open. Please fill them, because Paloma and I cannot do this without you. And so, yes, thank you again for attending. Please go find your tribe. It's not all of the networks within the membership. There are so many doing incredible things. We will look to do more of this and bringing our networks to the table. We're here to give you a platform. We're here to champion the work that you're doing. And so please mingle with those that are here today. And if we didn't give you a platform and a voice today, like I said, come find me. There's a lot of opportunities to do that. So thank you.